Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Sarah noticed the tired exchange of glances between the two women, Mrs. Adams, Tom's teacher, and Mrs. Davis, the school director. Their silent communication seemed like a wordless agreement. Well, we'll just have to put up with this simple-minded parent a little longer. What can you expect from her? She froze in surprise, unable to compose herself. So far away, surely there isn't a boarding school any closer? I won't even be able to visit him every day after work. I simply won't make the return bus. Mrs. Davis, the director, tried to speak softly, as if to a child. A boarding school doesn't imply daily parental visits. You can pick Tom up on Saturdays, and he'll spend the weekends with you. And holidays too. I'll help you fill out the application for the education allowance. You're a single mother with a low income, you're entitled to benefits. And believe me, this is the best solution, first and foremost, for Tom. However much Sarah tried to convince herself not to give in to weakness, her eyes involuntarily filled with moisture, heavy with unspoken pain. Soon, the unbidden tears rolled down her cheeks. Her mascara was probably smudged, making her look utterly pathetic. Mrs. Adams, Tom's teacher, kindly offered her a napkin, apparently from the school cafeteria, and sat down on a chair nearby. "Sarah dear, let's talk like human beings, shall we, Mrs. Davis?" "Thank you. That way it will probably be clearer. For Tom, this is truly a great opportunity. Please don't think that a boarding school necessarily means neglected children from troubled families. That's not the case. Sometimes life circumstances just happen to be such that parents have to choose this form of education for their children, and there's no shame in that. This boarding school has a good reputation. These aren't just words for a report. A close friend of my cousin works there as a cook. She knows what goes on inside. The atmosphere is healthy, there are no horrors, no fights, for example, ever. And the teaching staff is very cohesive. And most importantly, the English teaching is superb. The teacher is strong and knows how to truly engage students. For Tom, with his abilities, such teachers are the most important thing. He's a very gifted, remarkable boy. I've worked here for 25 years, Sarah. Believe my experience and ability to compare. He won't get such a quality education at our local school. Forgive me, Mrs. Davis, but we simply don't have specialists of that level. Mrs. Davis nodded, sighing softly. Who would come here to work with such a wealth of knowledge? Exactly. Mrs. Adams gestured towards the director. Sarah, this is the harsh truth of life. Think about Tom's interests. He'll grow up and be grateful to you for giving him a chance at a different life. Language is needed everywhere now, and with language come completely different opportunities and salaries. Well, I see you've calmed down and agree with me. Excuse me, I just got a bit overwhelmed. Sarah wiped her hot cheeks with the napkin, quickly crumpled it up, and threw it in the waste bin under the table. I just can't imagine how I'll tell Tom about this. What if he thinks I want to get rid of him? He'll grow up and say, "You sent me away so you could have an easier life." And we've already thought about that, haven't we, Mrs. Davis? Mrs. Adams smiled, pleased with her foresight. I've already spoken with Tom twice, and you have nothing to worry about, Sarah. He's not at all against studying in the city if he can come home on weekends. He's interested in everything new. At his age, it's seen as an adventure. Besides, even though he's quiet and diligent, he's not timid and strives to achieve a lot. You're raising such a boy, Mrs. Davis. You'll be proud of him yet. It seemed to Sarah that this conversation had only happened yesterday, but already in 6 months, her son would be graduating. All the details were promised at the pre-New Year parent meeting. For a year and a half, she had been setting aside a little from each paycheck for this event to give her son a pleasant surprise. And if it wasn't enough, her friend Betty promised to help. It would be good to find out the exact amount of the contribution in advance to figure out how much would be left for a suit and shoes for Tom. And probably, she would need to thank someone separately, at least the class teacher. Bet, what do you think? Flowers, chocolates, maybe some cognac? Sarah consulted her more experienced friend. What cognac, you silly thing? Betty laughed, throwing her head back. You're not going to a doctor after being discharged. Don't even think about it. It's like everyone else. You'll pay the money, and the parent committee will organize everything themselves. You don't need to bring anything separately. Better buy something for yourself, something to wear to the graduation. When was the last time you bought anything for yourself? Looking at you, it's as if they haven't paid salaries at your post office for years. Everything for your son, everything for little Tom. That's good, of course, but there's a limit to everything. You can't completely forget about yourself. I'm almost 10 years older than you, Sal, and I still consider myself young and sometimes indulge myself. And you're only 35? You're still just a girl, and you've already signed yourself up as an old maid. Betty, it seemed, could go all day without food, as long as she had the chance to lecture someone about life. Most often, Sarah was the one who fell into her hands for this purpose. But Betty not only gave unsolicited advice, she also never refused to help if needed. However, about spending on herself, it was easy for Betty to talk. She had a husband with a modest but stable job at the tractor station, and her adult daughter and son-in-law lived in the big city, didn't ask for help, and sometimes even helped their parents with money. Reminding Betty that when her Debbie went to college in the city, she also had to spend money. She didn't want her daughter to look poor, was useless. She didn't want to. Since the 4th grade, that is, for almost 8 years, her son had been studying at the city boarding school. Kind Mrs. Adams, who still taught the little ones at their Camishan school, had been right. In Tom's class, there were only 2 children from underprivileged families, and Tom was one of them. The others studied at the boarding school for various reasons. Some were no longer wanted by their mother's new husband, even if he wasn't poor at all. Some had a single or divorced mother who worked 2 jobs or ran her own small business and was simply afraid to leave her child completely unsupervised. And there were many other stories. Everyone had their own life, and it was easiest to judge without understanding. Some bought their children off with expensive gifts, didn't take them home every weekend, but gave them expensive cell phones or game consoles instead. Tom told her. Sarah didn't ask if he liked such a substitute. She was shy about asking uncomfortable questions. The main thing was that her son seemed happy to come home, and that was enough. She tried her best to make sure he didn't feel deprived. It wasn't his fault that she was a complete orphan and raising him alone. And Sarah tried. She bought simple toys at first, then a game console her son mentioned, a player, a cell phone, shoes, and clothes. She knew she was buying the cheapest things, but with her salary as a postal operator, she had to manage to buy anything beyond the absolute necessities. There was truly nothing left for herself, and Sarah tried not to notice. What was the point of thinking about it and walking around with a dissatisfied look? A tearful, unhappy face wouldn't bring in any more money anyway. Betty was reading aloud an article from a fashion magazine. Negative emotions have a detrimental effect on health. See, I always felt that, Betty triumphed. My mother used to tell me, spit on everything, take care of your health. And now British scientists have confirmed it. Oh, these British scientists are everywhere. Sometimes they study such nonsense that everyone has known for ages without them, and they probably get huge money for it. They rewrite an old truth in new words and go to the Canaries with the royalties. Look, it even rhymed, but we won't be envious. We don't care about their earnings. Let's forget about negative emotions and be healthy. Sarah completely agreed that whining wouldn't add to her health, so she nicknamed her boots, which she had been wearing for 10 years, anniversary boots, and tried to look at them without sadness. Just recently, before weekends and holidays, Sarah would travel to the regional city and pick up her son from the boarding school. She loved those evenings when they sat side by side on the bus. She would put her arm around his shoulders, they would chat about everything under the sun, and somewhere halfway, Tom would fall silent and fall asleep, and Sarah would listen to his quiet breathing. But for 3 years now, Tom had been traveling home by himself. 8th grade, Mom, I can already take a regular bus and get to Camishan myself. And 1 ticket is cheaper than 2. You're always talking about saving money. Look at you, you sly one. You found an excuse. You latched on to saving money. You've grown up completely. Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. Just say you're embarrassed to travel with your mom like a little kid. Of course, the boy had grown up. He wanted to feel independent. It made her a little sad. This was the time when he almost stopped needing her, and soon he would stop needing her altogether. You should be happy, Betty declared decisively. hearing her sad confessions. "You've almost raised a boy. Soon he'll start earning money himself. And it will be much easier for you. You'll finally be able to breathe, rest, and afford something for yourself." Sarah understood that her friend was right, but for some reason, she couldn't feel happy. The parent meeting at the boarding school was scheduled a week before the New Year holidays. Tom stayed to finish his studies, and Sarah went home to the village alone on the last evening bus. She felt a little lost. The graduation would cost more than she had anticipated. In Kamyshin, they collected much less for school events because most parents barely made ends meet. Unless someone's husband worked rotational shifts somewhere far away, then they had money, or someone who kept livestock and sold meat. She had taken the amount she had saved for a year and a half just in case from her salary, but now, no matter how she counted, it would only be enough for a suit and shoes for Tom, and she herself would have nothing to wear to go see her son. Okay, maybe she would figure something out in 6 months. She could borrow a dress from someone, but shoes were more difficult. However, all of this was such nonsense. The main thing was that her Tom had won the District English Olympiad, and he was good with the exact sciences. Only chemistry and biology sometimes had 3s. He wasn't interested in those subjects. And the other teachers praised him highly. It was interesting. Who did he get it from? Sarah herself had been a mediocre student, and Mike, Tom's father, hadn't shown much zeal for studying, and no one in their families had a solid education. Tom would be the first, although it was better not to think about it so as not to jinx it. Sarah and her friend Betty had a solid plan. When Tom got into university, he could live in the city with Betty's cousin's aunt. The aunt agreed to rent out a room for almost nothing as long as the tenant helped her with chores, carrying groceries from the store and walking her dog in bad weather. Her son lived in Moscow, and she herself was often ill and complained that it was hard for her without help, as long as the aunt didn't change her mind and ask for a high price. "Girl, wake up your beloved Kamyshin." The bus conductor touched her shoulder. "Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Did I hold up the bus? Thank you. Goodbye." Sarah grabbed her bag and jumped off the bus, not having time to fully wake up. "Good girl," the conductor said after her. She liked to discuss passengers when she was in the mood, and there weren't many people on the bus. Her son studies in the city, at the boarding school. She's so proud of him. He's a smart boy. She only thinks about him. She's raising him alone. You saw the worn-out jacket she wears, and her boots will tear soon. She's neat, takes care of herself, but poverty can't be hidden. And she's pretty. If you dressed her up, your whole bus fleet would break their necks looking back. I can tell you that for sure. Oh well. A week later, as the small staff of the Kamyshin post office was getting ready to set a modest table after work on the last pre-New Year's Day, Betty rushed into the office. You could always tell if something had happened by her. She would become serious and focused. Now even her round cheeks seemed slightly sunken, her eyes were wide open, and confusion was frozen in them. "Sarah, hi. Put that jar of pickled tomatoes down. I just found out. From Todd, he used to work as a driver at a roadside cafe on the highway. She's the cashier, bartender, and waitress there. The cafe was popular with long-haul truckers and timber workers. He died. Mike. He got drunk, and for some reason climbed out of the sauna into an ice hole in such cold, and his heart couldn't take it. I didn't ask for details, and Todd probably doesn't know them anyway. I had no idea that his friend Toddy had kept in touch with Mike all these years. They called and wrote to each other. I only just found out by chance. I asked him why Moose looked so gloomy, and he said, yesterday he and Toddy were remembering their friend. That's the story. Just like that, had a decent drink once, and he's gone. He was so young. Who would have thought his heart was weak?" Sarah inexplicably picked up the 3-liter jar of tomatoes again and quietly called out to her boss, "Mrs. Peterson, I won't be able to stay for the office party. Truly, I can't. Please excuse me and the girls." "What happened, Sar?" "She found out Tom's father died," Betty answered for her friend. "Oh," Mrs. Peterson exhaled. She wanted to add something, but just waved her hand and suddenly offered, "Both of you stay, girls. We can remember him together. What will you do sitting alone, remembering? dwelling on things, and we're friends here. If you need to talk, we'll always listen. You really should stay, Sarah, Betty supported her. I can't. My husband is waiting for me earlier. He's worried he won't make the aspic properly without me. And we have guests for New Year's. I wouldn't care about this aspic when things like this happen, but then he'll grumble for 2 weeks that I'm chatting with my friends while the house is neglected. So thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Keep an eye on things. And tomorrow Tom is coming, and my mood will immediately improve. That's life. What can you do? It goes on. In the morning, Sarah scolded herself for going to Betty's after the get-together at the post office instead of going home. She wasn't used to alcohol. She drank extremely rarely. A glass of champagne on New Year's or a shot of sweet infusion on someone's birthday, and she had no idea of her limit. And here, all evening, she and Betty reminisced about the past, their youth, Sarah's love story with Mike, and Betty's husband Al, upon hearing the reason, brought a bottle of cherry infusion. He made the infusions himself, and they were treacherous, delicious, easy to drink like juice, but if you had too much, your legs would start to tangle even with a clear head. Al remembered Mike with the friends with one shot and quietly retreated, not bothering them anymore, and they stayed up long past midnight. Only then did she understand. All these years, she had kept the promise she made to herself, not to talk or even think about Mike. But today she could, she even had to, especially since she trusted Betty and wasn't at all ashamed of her memories in front of her. Mike appeared in their class in the very last school year. He came with his father, who had decided to return to the village after many years of working all over the country. Mike's father, Max, was a drilling foreman and had traveled to many places with different expeditions, with geologists and surveyors. The Kamishin women discussed the strange story for almost a month. Mike's mother had left him for another man, simply ran away, leaving her son with his father. When fathers abandon children, no one is surprised, but it's hard to comprehend when a mother can do that. Such was the unanimous verdict of the local gossips. What kind of love did she find? Her husband hardly drank, was calm, handy, even saved money. Not a lot, but enough to repair his old father's house and buy new furniture. And he had a car, even if it was old. In short, quite a catch. He wouldn't be alone for long, especially since his son was almost grown up, soon going into the army. He'd stay here, in the village. There's nothing for young people here now. As soon as Sarah saw Mike, she immediately felt that something special would happen between them. She had never dated anyone, hadn't even thought about boys. She was still a child. But then she understood, and that was it. Most teenage boys were awkward, gangly, but he was well built. He entered the classroom behind the headmistress and looked up. His very first glance fell directly on Sarah, and they looked at each other for a few moments without looking away. Sarah knew he liked her. There was no need for words. Sarah's mother, Lucy, studied in the district center and married a newcomer from the North Caucasus there. In the first years, when the young couple rented accommodation, they lived well, and their daughter Sarah was born. And then they left for her husband's homeland, where his behavior among his own people changed almost beyond recognition. Mom told her he was terribly jealous and started acting tough, saying, "Be quiet, woman, I'm in charge." And his mother, "A woman is supposed to honor and endure her mother-in-law's nagging until she becomes a mother-in-law herself. Here, at least relatives would stand up for you if something happened, but I was a stranger. I had no one. I endured it for a little while. It was scary to divorce with a small child, but I decided to and left for home with you. If it had been a son, maybe my husband wouldn't have given him up. He would have fought for custody, but he'd let you go easily." Having returned home, Mom Lucy got a job at the post office. Sarah remembered this post office for as long as she remembered herself. She was constantly hanging around there after school at her mom's work. She knew how everything was organized there, as if it were her own home. After her mother's death, Sarah was hired to her position, and everyone considered it a matter of course. Who else would they hire? Perhaps the post office was Sarah's destiny. But back then, she was sure, her destiny was Mike. Mom instilled in Sarah that a girl should seem a little indifferent, sometimes capricious, not be the first to make up after a quarrel. Let the boy think he wasn't as important to her as she was to him. Let him win her over. And all this was in vain. Her mother's words flew past her daughter's ears. Sarah was completely unable and unwilling to hide how much she loved Mike. He liked it, and he got used to it. They didn't even quarrel once. Sarah easily gave in. Everything seemed trivial compared to the happiness of being near him. The first school year flew by in a whirlwind, and Mike left for the district center to study to be a car mechanic. And Sarah went to see him every weekend when he couldn't or didn't want to come to the village himself. Most often, he just didn't want to. Mike's father misses him very much. You should visit him. You haven't been home for 2 months. He started plying me with drinks after each of my trips to see you. I even promised him I'd come myself and tell him your news. Last time he asked if you were offended by something. I think he was hinting that you're jealous of him and Aunt Tammy. Tell him I'm an adult. I have my own things going on here. Let him live with his Tammy. I'm completely fine with it. He shouldn't live alone. I'm not planning to live in the village after studying in the army. Sarah thought it was a matter of course. When he talked about himself, he was talking about her too. They were always together, and it would always be that way. She never once became wary. Was there even a place for her in Mike's future plans? Mike's father, Uncle Max, was a little bit to be pitied. Although he had found a girlfriend, a son was a son. Before the army, Mike finally came to Kamyshin to see his father. He was seen off here. He had already worked in a car repair shop. He was confident. He had money. He brought Sarah a tight blue denim miniskirt and a white t-shirt with palm trees and a beach. She wore the gifts to Mike's send-off party for the army. Kamyshin was not a small village, and half of Kamyshin came to see Mike off. Tammy, Max's girlfriend, along with her friends, set tables in the garden. She worked as a cook and came up with many interesting dishes from the simplest products, so there would be enough for everyone. Mike's friend Gary, who worked at the same car repair shop, came from the district center. He was older, about 25, and Sarah danced 2 slow dances with him. Mike got seriously sulky with her, but by evening he was tired of pretending to be jealous, and they slipped away from everyone together to the river, where a group of local fishermen had built a small riverside hut. It turned out surprisingly cozy. They would crash there in the evening with shish kebab and other tasty things, and at dawn they would go fishing. That evening, no one was there, and the hut sheltered Mike and Sarah until dawn. It seemed to her like a good omen. It meant they would have their own home soon. They just had to wait a little. She didn't tell Mike about it. She was somehow shy. And then the waiting began, the first month of which seemed endless. And a little later, Sarah found out she was going to have a baby, and she immediately told Mike about it. When the reply to her letter came, Sarah clearly understood that the baby would only be hers. Mike explained that he hadn't planned any children until he had his own home and money, and she had carelessly put him on the spot like a child. If Sarah wanted them to stay together, she had to solve the problem. It's nothing terrible, there's still enough time to fix everything. Right when you've decided everything. Kisses. Bye. Sarah stopped writing. She hadn't decided anything, although Mike had expressed himself so clearly, and he gave no sign of himself. 2 months later, her mother died of a rapidly progressing serious illness, and grief for a while overshadowed other problems. Her mother hid what was happening to her until the end. She thought it best not to frighten her daughter in advance, since the doctor's prognoses were unambiguous, unfavorable. The funeral and memorial service passed. Neighbors and friends helped. Sarah lived in a fog and didn't even realize that her condition was already noticeable. Uncle Max came, cleared his throat, and asked, "Sarah, is it okay if I'm direct? Does Mikey know?" "He knows. He knows he doesn't want it. He asked me to solve the problem," Sarah said dryly. "I'll write to that stray puppy," Uncle Max promised hopefully. I don't doubt that he's the father. There can be no other." But Mike replied the same thing to his father as he had to her. He hadn't planned anything like this, that he shouldn't be taken into account at all. He could be presented with a fait accompli. And he wasn't going to get married, not until he was 30. He wanted to see the world. Especially since life had changed now, there were different opportunities, and he already knew where he would go to work after the army. He had arranged it. So he shouldn't be waited for in Kamyshin. Sarah felt sorry for Mike's father when he came to show her the letter. He couldn't even utter a word himself and didn't dare to step further than the threshold into the house. "Uncle Max, let's not panic in advance. Maybe he'll change his mind after all." "It's just the shock," Sarah began to comfort both herself and her potential father-in-law. "I'll help when the baby is born. Don't be shy, just ask," Uncle Max assured her and quickly left the door. Sarah really hoped it made it easier for her, and when her son was born, she named him after Mike's father. Mike still gave no sign of himself. Grandpa Max did help in the first years. He bought a stroller, a crib, a snowsuit for his grandson. Sarah received a benefit as a single mother. She couldn't bring herself to demand that Mike acknowledge paternity and pay alimony, as if it were something dirty. Then Uncle Max found a new job and moved beyond the Urals with Tammy. He stayed there. He liked it. Sometimes he sent small amounts for Tom's birthday and New Year's, and then Sarah would give them to Tom in parts as pocket money. But for the last couple of years, much less money had come from his grandpa. Max had retired and no longer went on expeditions. "Does Max know that his son is no longer alive?" "Someone already told him without you, Sar," Betty told her friend. "Don't open that wound. It's not your business to comfort Max. You've drifted apart. Fate has taken you far away. Forgive me, of course, for being blunt, but there, your Mike has seen the world. And why do people think that if you live only for yourself and your convenience, happiness will immediately come your way? Nothing came, but he's gone." In fact, her friend was right. Her tongue felt heavy, barely moving in her mouth. It was time to go home. Tom was coming for the holidays tomorrow. She had wanted to cook something tasty for him in the evening, but now she would have to do it early in the morning. She woke up when Tom was already home and the sun was shining brightly through the windows. She jumped out of bed, throwing a robe over her old pajamas. She felt ashamed in front of her son. She had never greeted him like this before. She had to explain everything to him. He would understand. He was grown up. "Fa, Mom, I already know everything. Calm down," Tom interrupted her rambling story. "You don't have to worry about me. I don't feel anything about this at all. For me, that person was as if he never existed. And the last thing you need is to start drinking because of this." Just yesterday, son. Just that one time. It doesn't mean I'm..." "Well, nothing. Nothing hurts anymore. That person was once very important to me. So Betty and I remembered him. But let's talk about something good instead. You said someone was bringing you a suit and shoes for graduation?" "Yes, Tim's mother brings goods from Poland. She promised to find something for the amount I specified. I told her not to go over budget. I don't want you to get into debt, and I haven't earned anything myself yet." Sarah cracked a couple of eggs into a bowl for the pie with a flourish and sighed. "Well done. That's right. We don't need debts. We have nothing to pay with. I can't figure out what I'll wear to your graduation myself yet." "Hey, Mom, can I ask you for one thing?" Tom asked suddenly, abruptly. "Of course," Sarah readily replied. "Just don't scare me. You're too serious about something." "No, nothing's wrong. It's just, don't come to the graduation, okay? It's easier for you. You don't have to rack your brain over extra problems." "What? Why?" Sarah was flustered. "It's such an event. It happens only once, like a wedding. I'll look at you and be proud of how you've grown up. You'll leave to study, to work, and I'll remember you as I saw you that day." "Mom, you'll see me a million more times without this. There's nothing new or interesting there. It's all boring nonsense. The only interesting thing is the disco on the boat, but that's only for graduates without parents." "You don't understand me, Tom," Sarah laughed, not knowing how else to react. "My life is pretty much the same every day, so even solemn nonsense will do." There was silence for a couple of minutes. Tom hesitated, choosing his words, and finally said in the same abrupt, tense voice, "Please don't be offended, but there are other holidays here where everyone knows you and no one will judge you by your appearance. You've gotten used to your life and don't notice how poorly we live, and that other people see it. I never told you, but after meetings, they really discuss the parents. Who wore what? Who arrived in what? How it irritates me. You studied here in the village where you were all the same and you just don't understand. No matter what I am myself, I'll never gain authority as long as some people call me the son of a tramp. I even got into fights because of it. Do you remember how the class teacher complained about my behavior? She was genuinely surprised. Such a student, such grades, and suddenly such behavior. Tom artistically mimicked the class teacher. I'm not going to explain it to her. Do you think that Sarah replied calmly. Are you ashamed of me? Do you regret that you were unlucky and got such a poor mother? As if you're worse off than all other mothers. Mom, don't make it complicated. I'm not ashamed of you, but of our poverty. Don't make me out to be a villain. People see not you, but your worn-out cheap sandals and penny dresses. There are plenty of such freaks, you can't prove anything to them. I just don't want to see those smirking faces. And why would you? So they can look at you like that? Fine. If you don't want me to, I won't go, Sarah snapped, starting to furiously whisk the liquid batter. At least I'll really save money on travel and everything else. Thanks, Mom, you're the best. I'll go drop by Tony's. I'll make it before lunch. Tom quickly, awkwardly hugged his mother's shoulders and ran off to his friends. Sarah thought it would be better for her to cry out all the bitterness now, but she continued to quickly, silently whisk the batter, grease the baking sheet, and peel apples for the pie. There were no tears in her eyes, as if something deep inside had dried up. She put the pie in the oven, went out into the hallway, forced herself to look up and meet her reflection in the mirror. It was okay, not completely lost, nothing to feel sorry for herself about. Her son was a child not long ago, and you couldn't expect him to be an adult. And the worn-out sandals weren't permanently attached to her feet, new ones would appear. Tomorrow was December 31st. She had to make a good wish at midnight on New Year's Eve. Not just for Tom, but for herself too, first and foremost. Squinting her eyes scrutinizingly, she repeated, "And for myself too." Yes, I really think we should go visit your mother. Yes, I think it's better to meet before going to the registry office, not after. You know what my relationship with my parents is like, and it's time to get yours in order. If you think you've gotten involved with a nagging, bossy woman, you still have time to change your mind and formally break off our engagement. Julia was neither nagging nor bossy, but she often managed to fit both a joke and serious things into the same sentence. It was never boring with her. She took many things in life lightly, but sometimes showed principledness at the most unexpected moments for Tom. When it became clear that their relationship was much more than a fleeting romance, she wanted to know more about her boyfriend. She was interested in precisely what Tom usually avoided discussing with girls. Mocking, easygoing Julia absolutely seriously respected family ties and was very close to her parents. And that didn't mean obedience at all. And why do you never talk about your childhood, about your parents? You didn't grow up in an incubator where they cloned software developers and testers, did you? Julia asked carelessly, but a scrutinizing slyness lurked in her eyes. Well, you almost guessed right, Tom chuckled, trying to hide his confusion. I studied at a boarding school, and boarding schools are often called incubators, like orphanages. But they were definitely called that back then. I don't know about now. I'm from the village, Jules. Wow, what a confession, Julia declared with a smirk. Do you consider that the most terrible fact of your biography? Now you can't get out of it. That skeleton has already fallen out of the closet. And it's beautiful, only in books with soft, bright covers. Julia took his arm and slowed her pace, signaling that she was ready to listen attentively. Since he had finally decided to get married at 30, let his fiancée know him as he really was, not the legend for casual acquaintances. As Tom expected, what surprised Julia most was his story about his mother. 15 years without seeing your mother? What? And money? You send her money constantly, don't you? I've been sending it since I started earning more than I needed for survival. She's refused several times, claiming she has enough of her own. But that's because she's not used to allowing herself anything, she's more used to saving on herself. We call each other on holidays and just like that. I've never heard her reproach me with something like, I miss you and you never come. I've invited her to visit me in Moscow so many times, she just can't get herself together. There are always some silly reasons. And I'm not ready to spend my vacation visiting the village either. You just don't see the difference. You're not going to the village, you're going specifically to your mother, Julia reminded him. Oh, let's go together before the wedding. I think your mother and I will get along." "That's exactly what I don't doubt," Tom immediately confirmed, although he wasn't sure of anything. He hadn't talked to his mother face to face in a long time, always just a few general phrases on the phone. He didn't know himself if his mother was still the way he remembered her, or if she was a completely different person now. He simply hadn't had time to think about it while he was building his life. "We still have a whole month to get a gift for your mother. What would make her happiest?" Julia interrupted his unaccustomed thoughts with an unexpected question and completely stumped Tom. It seemed the last time he had given his mother something was a very long time ago, with his first salary when he got a job as a night watchman in his first year of university. He remembered her perpetually worn synthetic leather handbag, which she had already dyed twice in the middle of the night shift. He suddenly felt ashamed and sorry. Before going home, he simply bought a new handbag at the shopping center, not the most expensive one on sale, but from a proper store, leather. He arrived for the visit with 2 sports bags full of all sorts of groceries and first pulled out a glossy package with a gift from one of them. "Here, this is for you." "Wow, now I'll be the most fashionable girl in Kemishin," Mom announced cheerfully, immediately transferred her wallet, a pack of tissues, and a fabric cosmetic bag into the new handbag, slung the bag over her shoulder, and went into the hallway to twirl around. Tom sat at the table, watched her, and thought with rather condescending amusement how little it took to make his mother happy. But then there was a quiet knock at the front door, and his mother responded in a melodious, girlish voice, "Come in." And a bearded, red-haired man entered, looking like a Viking from some fantasy film. He smiled quietly, stopping a couple of steps from the threshold, looked at his mother, and then suddenly noticed Tom sitting at the table. And then his mother, casting quick glances at both of them in turn, said, "Oh, hi, Nick. Come in, sit down. Meet my son, Tom." "Tom, Nick worked with Grandpa Max on an expedition. He's a surveyor. Do you remember I told you that Grandpa's—" "I came to visit my father during his vacation and brought greetings from Grandpa in the form of homemade honey," Nick clarified, entering the living room and pointing to the 3-liter jar with dark amber contents that Tom had noticed on the old sideboard as soon as he arrived. "Pleased to meet you, Tom. My father also has several beehives, just like your grandpa in his new place." He extended his wide, tanned hand to Tom, and Tom silently shook it, simply not wanting to seem like a savage. "You came to visit your father on his vacation, so spend time with your father. It was almost 20 kilometers to Kolmi, a village on the highway. If he went to the district center, it was easy to figure out that the red-haired surveyor clearly wasn't just passing through Kemishin on his way, but had gotten into the habit of visiting their house. The guest wasn't dense. He immediately understood that he was unwelcome at the moment. He didn't even sit down, walked back and forth along the window and said, "Be well, Sarah, I'll be on my way. You and your son probably have a million important things to talk about. See you." "See you." Mom nodded with a slight smile, and her eyes twinkled mysteriously, watching the guest's back. "What is this Nick doing here?" Tom asked immediately. Barely had the door quietly closed behind the surveyor, not hiding his displeasure. Did he want a full vacation with affection and hot meals? He should have gone south then. That's a resort program. Mom walked over to the table where Tom was sitting and, whether joking or serious, lightly tapped the tabletop with her small tired fist. "Son, even if you're grown up and brought gifts, still choose your words with your mother. If you've noticed, I haven't interfered in your life since graduation, not at all." She still felt the need to add, "By the way, Nick cooks perfectly well himself and doesn't need my watery cabbage soup." Tom himself couldn't explain why this old conversation suddenly came back to him now. He and his mother didn't realize then that they wouldn't see each other for many years. While he was visiting his mother that last time, Nick didn't appear in their house again, and they never mentioned anything about it again. Tom had no idea if she had a personal life, and it never even occurred to him to ask. And now, when she was almost 50, it seemed awkward to start asking. In the photos she sometimes sent him on his phone, his mother looked cheerful and serene. Did she know how to create the appearance of happiness, or was she really doing well? Tom had never thought about that either. He was busy with himself, his career, and recently, his personal life. The upcoming trip made him think uneasy thoughts. He envied Julia. How could she be so happy, as if she were about to travel to a seaside resort? And most importantly, anxiety crept into his mind. Would Julia look at him differently when she saw the living conditions he grew up in? For her, rural tourism was an ethnic village somewhere in Greece or Spain, and there the floors and dark hallways didn't collapse because of rotten boards, and silly bouquets from the 80s didn't hang on the walls. Sharp-eyed Julia would see all this and understand that if you scraped a successful software developer from an international company properly, you would find a kid underneath in oversized cheap jackets from the night market with a lousy cell phone whom the class leaders called the son of a tramp. Well, whatever happens, happens. You can't run away from yourself forever and not see your mother for so many years. It's a disgrace. Getting angry at himself always worked flawlessly for him, and 15 minutes later, he was calling Julia and telling her that he had bought 2 train tickets. There are no airports nearby. It's far and inconvenient to get there from a plane, and the train stops at the station in the neighboring village for a whole 2 minutes. If we're lucky, we'll manage to jump off. Practice, you have almost a month. Mom promised to meet them at the train and absolutely refused to take no for an answer. She had probably been stuck in Kamyshin and just wanted to ride the bus back to the station, chat with the acquaintances she only met on the road. When Tom wrote to her that he was coming to visit with his fiancée, he immediately received a reply. "Wow, I'm happy. Waiting for you at Station Square." Julia said, "Now I understand," and showed off the gifts she had bought for his mother. It turned out she had bought wind chimes for the garden, a tablecloth for the table in the gazebo in the same style, and a set of colorful ceramic dishes to match. God knows Tom had no idea how suitable these gifts were for his mother, but he admired them just in case. He would give her money himself, as usual. At Sudakovo Station, Tom was the first to jump onto the dusty, packed earth. Nothing had changed, except that the wooden station building had been repainted from green to light blue, but everything else remained the same. No one had thought to asphalt the circular area in front of the building. Nothing had grown there for a long time anyway. The station ground was forever trampled by 100 years of dust. No trees under the windows, and only at the end of the area, near an old Neva, a lively dark-haired woman slipped out of it, waved hello, and called out brightly, "Tom, hi." "That's Mom!" Tom nudged Julia's sleeve, snapping out of his thoughts. "Let's go. She found someone to take us home comfortably." They quickly walked towards his mother, and his mother approached them just as quickly. With one arm, she held the other, immediately extending her hand to Julia. "Sarah, how was your trip, Julia?" "Thank you. We had a great trip, with good neighbors in the compartment." "That's wonderful." Mom smiled, and standing on tiptoes, hugged Tom tightly and kissed him on both cheeks. Her eyes shone with genuine joy, and a warm, honey-like scent wafted from her. She immediately stepped back a little after the greeting to look at her son, and he looked at her in surprise. She didn't look old and worn out. She was almost the same as he remembered her, and at the same time, somehow different. His mother, who had kept her slim figure in those loose blue jeans, plaid shirt, and cap, could almost pass for his peer if you didn't look too closely at the network of fine lines on her forehead and at the corners of her eyes. You would never guess she was 50. Her eyes were bold, young, quick. Mom preferred to voice her conclusions aloud. "How respectable you've become. None of our people will recognize you for sure, and if they do, they'll faint. If I hadn't seen your photos and videos, I wouldn't have recognized you as my son right away. Julia, is he at least not a boring snob?" No, don't worry," Julia laughed. "Then load the luggage into the trunk, son," Mom suggested. "And who is our driver?" Tom asked. "Our driver is me," Mom smirked slyly, noticing his bewildered surprise. "Don't worry about your lives, I'll get you there perfectly. The roads are quiet out here, I won't demonstrate any special skill, I drive carefully, like a real hen. But it's safe, gentlemen." Without waiting for an answer, Mom settled behind the wheel. Julia giggled softly, looking at Tom, and whispered to him, "What's ahead of you? Getting to know Mom all over again." Mom had no intention of keeping the aura of mystery for long and explained as soon as they got onto the highway. I won't pretend I've become a businesswoman and managed to earn enough for a car. My husband bought it. I didn't want to learn to drive at all. I was scared, but he persuaded me. At first I trembled and got lost, but then it was fine. I got used to it. Mom, why didn't you even tell me you got married? Tom decided to ask, trying to hide his surprise and confusion. Well, forgive me. Excuse me, Tom. My husband said I should tell you, but I somehow couldn't bring myself to. There was no suitable occasion. It won't affect your life anyway. If you suddenly need the inherited house out here, it's definitely only your inheritance. I don't have any other children. I thought, when you come, you'll find out everything. Besides, you didn't approve of my choice right away. I remember that. What choice? Tom was no longer hiding his confusion. I married Nick, Mom explained softly. A long time ago. Do you remember Nick, the surveyor who worked with Grandpa Max and visited? Both guests and hosts went to bed only around 3 in the morning, deciding that otherwise they wouldn't get any sleep at all that day, and the young people had just come off the train. The night was clear, as if ordered, and they sat for a long time in the garden under the big stars, at the table covered with the new tablecloth, feasting and drinking a whole samovar of tea while they talked. Nick fell asleep quickly. He had been working until evening after all, and Sarah lay quietly, looking at the thin crescent moon in the window, and remembered that day in all its funny and happy details. Imagine how many years she and her son hadn't had a real conversation. But now that was over, and everything would be different. No, Tom called her every month, asked if everything was okay, how her health was, her work, if she needed any more money for something urgent. Hearing everything's fine, he would say that he was fine too. Sometimes he would tell her about changing jobs or getting a promotion, changing cars, buying an apartment, or where he went on vacation. She would congratulate him, he would thank her. He invited her to visit too, but probably out of politeness, not because he missed her. He had his own life there, at a completely different pace and by different rules. Many of his city acquaintances probably shouldn't be shown his village mother from the village post office so as not to spoil the impression of himself. Maybe Tom had even invented a different origin story and a different family for himself to get where he really wanted to be. She didn't want to believe that, and Nick claimed that it wasn't so sad, and he even grumbled, "How proud and stubborn you are. I would never have thought it when I got involved with you. You should talk to your son frankly. Tell him you miss him, that you're proud of how he achieved everything himself despite a difficult childhood. At least tell him about us, otherwise it's some ridiculous secret marriage, like in pulp novels. You should have reassured him long ago that you're not counting every penny, that life has improved, otherwise the boy sends you financial help and you put it in your stash, you schemer. Schemers stash it for themselves, but I'm saving it for him, like his personal banker. Now I'll formally present the contribution for the honeymoon," Sarah retorted, winking. "Stop being silly. You've raised a normal, capable boy. He's achieved a lot himself and has probably buried his childhood fears long ago. But you still remember that old childhood hurt, how he was ashamed to see you at his graduation. But you were already a grown girl then, and you got offended at a little silly boy." Usually Sarah listened to Nick. He was reasonable. He wouldn't blurt things out rashly. But when it came to her relationship with her son, she couldn't force herself. She even regretted in those moments that she had told Nick absolutely everything about herself. She wasn't offended by anyone. It was just that life itself had convinced her not to impose her love on anyone who didn't show that they needed her love. He was doing perfectly fine without her. She hadn't understood that with Mike, Tom's father, back then. She followed him like a faithful shadow, lived his problems and worries, but he really never discussed a life together or children with her and never promised anything. He talked about love only because all girls like to hear it, and it was convenient for him to have Sarah around while he lived in his father's house. She had made it all up herself. She only realized this when Tom left to study and she was left alone, and then it was as if fate brought her together with Nick. Everything turned out completely differently. Nick had traveled half the country due to his expeditionary fate, but he tried to visit his father in Colmy every year. He didn't think about settling down there until retirement, suspecting that he would sink into gloomy thoughts and become completely desperate. The fewer places he saw, the fewer reasons to be sad. He thought maybe his son would change his plans when he decided to get married again. But 10 years had passed since Nick's first brief marriage, and there was no hint of a new attempt. He even divorced 3 years after the wedding. He went on an expedition to the north, and his wife went to visit her mother and stayed there because she met a shoe store owner, and she and her mother decided it was the best option. Her husband wasn't offended. He blamed only himself for the failure. He was captivated by bright beauty, didn't pay attention to the fact that they were two different people. Gradually, he got used to the single, nomadic life. He didn't feel deprived at all, quite the opposite. There were always new people around, new interesting acquaintances. One day, on an expedition, he met a drilling foreman, a man of solid age. They chatted and found out they were fellow countrymen from the same district, 20 kilometers between their villages. They talked about fishing spots, mutual acquaintances, and in the mood, shared life stories. This fellow countryman, Max, told him about his family, about his runaway wife, about his foolish, selfish son, and his failed daughter-in-law with a real grandson. From that very evening of exchanging stories, they became friends, despite the age difference. Max retired and, together with his civil wife, took up amateur beekeeping. And when Nick was once again going on vacation to his father in Colmy, his friend gave him a jar of honey for Sarah, along with a thin envelope. Let it sweeten the girl's life. Sarah greeted the guest in a friendly manner. After 10 minutes of talking to her, it seemed as if they had known each other for a very long time. Nick subtly glanced around her living space. Everything spoke of poverty. Some people describe such homes as neat but poor. Many would say the same about the hostess's outfit, but there was no feeling of utter hopelessness in Sarah's home at all. On the contrary, a sense of coziness immediately came over you. Nick was surprised and spent the whole evening remembering his new acquaintance. No, the condition of the house didn't surprise him at all. He had seen interiors much worse on expeditions, at least 100 times dirtier. It was surprising to see such a beautiful woman living in this setting and not fading. And the next evening, he was at her house again and knocked on the door. "Nick, come in. Did you forget to give me something?" "Everything's fine. I just thought maybe you need some help. With brute force, I mean, to build or demolish a shed, for example." "Did Uncle Max ask you? It's brazen to ask someone to spend their vacation doing free work," Sarah smiled. "No, this is my own brazen initiative. Think about what you might need." And she suddenly became flustered. Nick understood. She wasn't used to things being done for her. She was more used to doing things for others herself. A spark of distrustful suspicion lit up in her eyes. It wouldn't be easy with her, but he had already decided that the game was worth the candle. Sarah was afraid for a long time to believe that this wasn't a trick or another self-deception. What could this guy need from her? Only a few encounters to spice up his vacation. And that wouldn't be bad for her. Many women really liked such short romances. She was afraid that it wouldn't turn out so easily and pleasantly for her. She would accidentally get attached to the person, and then she would foolishly and senselessly miss him and wait for something. And that was exactly what would happen with Nick. He was too much to her liking. It was better not to disrupt the usual course of life. "You're a coward, Sarah," Betty egged her on, even scolded her. "I never would have thought before that you were such a coward and that you had such a nasty opinion of yourself. It's obvious to the naked eye that he's a decent man and serious about you. Listen to what interesting thing I found out. One timber worker who always eats lunch at our place goes fishing with Nick's father. And they went recently. The father boasted that Nick is thinking of staying and seriously expanding the apiary, starting a legal honey business. He saved money up north while living a nomadic gypsy life, and now he's decided to settle down. There. I'm convinced. And what does that have to do with me?" Sarah defended herself. "Don't play dumb. You understand perfectly well," angry Betty hissed like a whistling kettle. "Tom didn't like him," Sarah offered her last argument. "Tom isn't the one who has to live with him," Betty replied even more sternly. "I'll tell you honestly, for Tom to understand something, time just has to pass. He's still young, let him grow up, get his own bruises first. Then you'll speak the same language again. And now, listen to yourself. Your intuition. Go on, take a risk, Sar. I'm telling you. Sarah was no longer able to argue with her. And she also noticed one thing. The more she resisted change, the more she looked for reasons to refuse, the more Nick gave her reasons to believe him. Betty was the witness at her and Nick's modest wedding. Who else? And then you and your husband built up this splendid apiary together? Julia asked. Aha, Sarah chuckled cheerfully. But it's only in movies that you cry on a frozen bus, and in the next shot, you're sitting in a Mercedes looking like a magazine beauty. We struggled so much with this apiary idea, we remember it ourselves, laugh, and can't understand why we didn't abandon it. I won't even talk about the bees themselves and the intricacies of handling them. You're probably not interested in that. And how many papers you need for legal honey sales. That's where it's dark for beginners. Product tests, veterinary certificate, sanitary passport for the apiary. I was ready to panic, but Nick is so balanced, no storms could shake him. We took a very long time to recoup the costs, but now our brand is well known in several districts of the region. It's time to expand our horizons. We have more experience now, it should go easier. I'm sure we'll be able to realize our plans with my husband. You are an invincible woman, Julia said, taking advantage of a pause in her future mother-in-law's story. Now I know for sure who Tom inherited his character from. Oh, Julia, Sarah laughed. Tom has achieved a lot. At his age, I was counting pennies. I couldn't even provide for him properly, so he wouldn't feel worse than other children. I would have sat at the post office for next to nothing my whole life if I hadn't been so lucky with my husband. So your flattery is misplaced. I understand everything about myself. I wasn't trying to flatter you, Julia objected. You're wrong to think that character is only shown in a career. I'm not 30 yet, and I see so many people embittered at the world, disappointed in everything, regardless of age. They live in decent conditions, their parents did everything so they wouldn't need anything while they were getting an education and starting work. They don't have children or don't have to raise them alone. Many of them probably wouldn't have been able to endure what you had to with dignity and not become embittered. I felt uneasy when I realized how cruelly Tom actually treated you, and you welcomed him so warmly. 15 years of only sending his mother some monetary payoff instead of attention and formally calling on holidays. A lot was on the tip of my tongue to say, I just didn't want to spoil your celebration since you were happy to see him anyway. Can I ask you something? Sarah interrupted. Please don't, Julia. It's hard enough for him now. I see he's already thought it all over himself. We'll build a real relationship. I'm not perfect either. As you see, I didn't even tell him about my marriage for many years. And I did take the monetary payoff, even though I didn't need it anymore. By the way, before the men from the apiary come back, here, take this envelope. It will come in handy for the wedding. Refusing your mother-in-law? Let's seal our friendship with a woman's secret.